I'm going to resume at 1/4 after, but I'm just decided to turn on the Zoom earlier so people have a couple of minutes to join. Because this is really important to go through this SQL injection in considerable detail. It's the most important vulnerability in the world. So, but I'll wait another minute or so to do it. All right. Good. Most of the people have come back. All right, so let's pick comp here. So I talked about this one where you can dump the names and social security numbers, and that is the most common end game of this. You steal the data, but you could also get a shell on the server in many cases. And this is something I learned from an attacker attacking. I had an early version of this page, and the guy kept changing parts I didn't intend him to change. And I said, how'd you do that? He wouldn't tell me, but I had to learn how to do better logging on my server. And I did it with Apache Forensic Logging. You can turn on Apache Forensic Logging, and it will save the entire URL of every web page handed out. And that's how I learned how to do this. So remember, I could make a file on the server. I made something called like test 118 or something like that. So I can write a new file. So what you do is you write a PHP file. Now then I can write code on the server and run it. So this is what's called a PHP shell. Let me put it up here. I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to talk about it. Okay, and I'm going to call this shell 118 to tell it from the others. So what this is going to do, it's going to put this stuff in double quotes into a file called temp shell118.php. And this is PHP code. Remember, we talked earlier, the less than question mark PHP is what starts PHP, and the question mark greater than is what ends it. This stuff in the middle is the active code, and what this is going to do is take a parameter called CMD and run it as a system command. So let's see what it does. If I run this query, it doesn't give me any result, but it does not give me an error message, so it worked. It created this thing called temp shell118.php. So I can find it here, temp shell118. Let's put it up here, shell, and instead it's not HTML, it's PHP. So if I view that, I just get a bunch of error messages because this is not intended to be viewed in itself. I have to give it a parameter like this, CMD equals LS. LS, if I can only spell LS. Okay, now it runs LS on my server. So I can now execute Unix commands on my server through this PHP shell. And if I want it to look prettier, in Chrome, I can just view the source. And now I'll even see it here. This is an LS of the files on my server. I can now do anything I want right here. But I don't have root, and I can show you that. Let me just move this to where it's not going to slide off my screen or get covered by that bar. Okay, so now I can do anything I want to my server within limitations. And the limitations I can find out with who am I. This is the Unix command to tell you who you are. I am www.data. I am not root. Because what I'm doing is I'm running through the Apache web server, and the Apache web server runs as www.data, and www.data has only certain permissions to do certain things on the box. So I can't do everything, but I can do a lot. I can do, for example, PS to see running processes on the box, and on I go. Although mostly I'm just going to see the processes run by this user. But now I can now execute commands on the server, and this is called a PHP shell. It's a very powerful technique. I can execute commands one by one, and they are not going through bash. They do not appear in the bash history. In fact, it's very hard to find any logging on the server that tells you what people do this way. The only thing I found that did it was this Apache forensic logging, which is very burdensome on the server. You don't usually want to run it on a real production web server. But anyway, that's a PHP shell, and it's a way to move from SQL injection to a shell where you can execute commands on the server. And what I could do here is I could do a wget to download more malware on the server and then run it and infect it with something like a rootkit and move on, if I could escalate my privileges to root. And that would not be too hard to do either. If I wanted to proceed and take over this server, I'd want to know what version it is. So uname -a is how you tell what kernel it is. So now I get the kernel, which is 4.7.2. And now if I think it's Ubuntu, which it is, I can find LSB release -a will tell me which version of Ubuntu it is. So it's Ubuntu 16.04.1, and the current version is 0.3 or 0.4. So this server is about a year behind on its patches. So there are known exploits where I could upload a file to the server even with low privileges and run it and get root. And then I could put a rootkit up that would give me remote control of the server forever, even after a reboot. And that's how people do it. That's why I say SQL injection can lead to complete server compromise. Not always, but frequently. And this is why they say this is the most dangerous kind of vulnerability, remote code execution, where I can type in a command and execute it on the server. I can usually do anything if I can get remote code execution. That's the most severe kind of vulnerability of all. All right.
There's a way to prevent people that, even if they did the SQL injection to run the command, PHP command.
I'm not aware of a way to block it at that point, although there might be some way to limit the permissions, but I don't think so because you want PHP to run. You have it on there so your developers can put PHP in the web page. So the Apache server has to be able to run PHP files. It's a problem. I think the usual thing you have to do is you have to block SQL injection in the first place. Once they've got SQL injection, I'm not sure you're going to have much luck stopping them from getting a shell. Now, if you patch your kernel, they might not be able to escalate to root, and that would do some good. But blocking the injection in the first place is good by writing better code or by putting a web application firewall in front that will watch for suspicious URLs and block them. That's another way to do it. It's not as effective, but it's easier than training your developers to write better code to just buy another box. And that's why a lot of people do it that way. There are different theories. I know Netflix told us that they didn't want any of our interns, they didn't want our graduates. We don't hire anybody until they have 5 years of real experience because those are the only people who actually know how to write secure code. So Netflix actually likes to write better code, which is the best answer. But a lot of people find that to be too much bother and they just pay for a firewall to try to block it on the way in. And that will help. That will stop simple attacks like Havij, but it's very easy for an intelligent attacker to sneak through those things by putting minor modifications in the code. Now, these are very good questions. Anyway, that's why I knew it was important to go through that. So you have a connection to a database server, so you're probably putting in text with punctuation marks, single quotation marks, double quotations, things like that. And if you get database errors, that would indicate you might have a SQL injection vulnerability. Now, you often have another server to authenticate users that has a database with names and passwords or something else in it. And so you might consider how the data is moved between the two servers, see if it's encrypted, see if the login and password information is stored in secure places, and see if you can attack the authentication server and steal the authentication data. The two common platforms, you're usually either Microsoft or open source. If you're Microsoft, you use IIS with ASP and SQL Server, because you want to use Microsoft version of everything to have it all work together. Or if you're Linux, you typically use Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, and that's why they call it LAMP from the acronym. LAMP used to be the most popular platform. Now it's Microsoft, the most popular platform, as you saw. Anyway, you can easily tell which one you've got because even just looking at the TTL in packets will tell Windows from Linux. Windows starts with a TTL of 64, Linux starts with a TTL of 128. Just looking at one packet from a ping or anything will usually tell you if you have Windows or Linux, and you can use Nmap or any other tool to tell you exactly what version you've got. So it's very easy to tell which one of these two situations you're dealing with. Now, you can also find on Pastebin, there are a ton of black hats out there running scans over the internet, finding vulnerable servers, and just dumping them on Pastebin. I went and looked earlier today. This guy, November 7th, just a couple days ago, he dumped out a bunch of data he stole from some German website. I grayed out the passwords, but he just dumped out these guys' passwords and email addresses in Germany. They're all over the place. A bunch of people do it and just put it on Pastebin. You can now go log in these guys' accounts, steal their credit cards, do anything you want. Here's another one from October 11, about a month ago, where he just put a whole series of vulnerable websites. These are all vulnerable to SQL injection. And it's interesting to see what kind of SQL injections you do. The simple one just has like CID equals 1, and if you put an apostrophe there, you get an error message. But here you see, if you have a numerical injection, like ID equals 99.9, union all, select 1, 2, 3, T, this is how you exploit it with these things here. Select all these numbers, and there's a process of this. See, if the field expects to put out like 10 columns, we do this in 124. We'll do it, in fact, in the web application hacking next semester. We'll go through this. If your field, if the result of the query is to print out some kind of table, and the table has like 10 entries, then you have to do union all with something that puts out 10 entries. So people like to just select numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the one thing they're looking for in here. So you'll get just numbers to fill up the table with enough columns, and then you'll get the thing you're looking for, like the password, in the one column you specified there. So these are the actual queries people use to steal things. And I tested one of them here. You just put an apostrophe at the end, and you get an error in your SQL syntax. So this shows that these guys have a real SQL injection, and this guy's not just lying. They usually aren't. These things stay up there forever, and it usually is about a year before people patch them. So, I mean, I remember the Supreme Court of Britain had a SQL injection. I contacted them and said, here you are on Pastebin. And she said, man, when I saw my name, my company on that list, my heart stopped. This is very common because a lot of people write it's very easy to find them with Google Dorks. All you have to do is have a certain Google search that looks for certain characters in the URL, and you can find thousands of these. And this is how the script kiddies do mass defacements. They'll just write a program that puts something like an anonymous mask on 10,000 websites in one night through SQL injection. Doesn't really accomplish much of anything, but it shows off that you're a bad hacker. You get to put your name on all those sites. And then you can be in people at contests. I had a student who told me he used to do this, and he was actually like the #1, hacked the most government websites one year on, there's like an X forum or something where you put these things up, X Hacker X or something. People compete to see who can hack the most sites. But he went straight as far as I can tell before he took my class. I never had a student continue to do crimes that I know of. Here's one. Another one is, this is local file inclusion. Remember I mentioned this is another huge problem in PHP. So this appears, I was looking on Pastebin, and I found Joe McCrae, who's a teacher, just like this. He teaches in Washington, D.C. He teaches classes like this. And he put this up like a month ago, September. This is his demo site. You go to this website. So this is showfile.php, file name equals about.txt. This is what people typically do with PHP. They put a PHP program, and then they have a parameter that tells it what file to print. And the problem is you can modify that parameter. So if file name is about.txt, you get information about this Acme laptop. But if you just change the parameter to /etc/password, you get the password file off the server, because it'll show you any file it can reach. This is called local file inclusion, where you can point the web server to a file that you were not supposed to be able to see and see it. And some of them will even let you put http://something.com there for the file name. That's called remote file inclusion, where I could add stuff from a remote file to the page. And then I can add malware to the page, put it in the link, compress it with tiny URL, and email it to people. When they click on the link, they'll see this page plus the malware and get infected. That's remote file inclusion. This is the most common problem with PHP, is local file inclusion and remote file inclusion. And when combined with SQL, you often have SQL injection. These are very common attacks. So anyway, here's something else OAuth does is have instructions, how to test websites for security. And we have a whole class in this, and you don't cover all this stuff, but you can see lots of things can happen here. Search engine discovery and reconnaissance for information leakage. This is a big thing. You can subscribe to services that will look on Pastebin and other sites and tell you if someone dumps your company's data, because people do all the time, hack in and dump data, and it's a good idea to just Google and otherwise search for it. And there's many things here. Test the methods, check your HTTP methods. check your user registration process and your account provisioning process. Very often, the process whereby you change a password or create a new account is vulnerable. Yeah?
So enumerating infrastructure and application admin interfaces is basically checking out all vulnerabilities.
Yeah, these are all vulnerabilities. There's so many ways to go wrong. And so that one there is looking at the admin interfaces. There's some way the administrator can log in. And often, that page is not secure, and there's some way for a non-administrative user to get to that page or impersonate the administrator, or steal the administrator's cookie or something like, for example, home routers very often have an administrator page that there are no actual permissions. So if you just go straight to that page, it doesn't make you log in first. That's called unsecured direct object reference, and that used to be one of the top 10 vulnerabilities, where you can go directly to something without really having passed through the authentication steps. Now I think it's probably included in insecure authentication.
This is a lot to do with this, but I'm trying, since I moved into this unit of mine, to tell my landlord to change the default password off the router, and he won't do it.
Yeah, that happens a lot, of course. Yeah, that's right. And so you can actually be, yeah. No, what you're telling, this is really good to know. This is this permanent condition of the security engineer. You always, yeah. So this is your whole life in this business. You see something, it's wrong, and management won't fix it. And then people get frustrated. This is a normal day. And in this business, you have to find some way to deal with it, because there are always people who own stuff who won't listen. And all you can do is wait for them to get hacked, and then they'll listen. After they get hacked 2 or 3 times, then they become receptive.
I said to them, you really probably won't get hacked. You're just a renter with 2 rooms.
I know, but this is always the case.
I'm telling you, the router with that word, that being the password, that makes me feel a little insecure.
Well, get used to it. This is a very valuable experience. This is going to be your whole life. Once you know security, is seeing stuff that is wrong and not being able to fix it because it belongs to somebody else. And beginners often try to convince people to fix things, and your odds of success are very low, like 1%. I've done it to hundreds of people, and 1% of them actually fix it, and like 0.1% try to prosecute you for telling them. So experienced professionals just get really jaded, and they say, if you see somebody with a vulnerability, just don't say anything, let them get hacked. That's all you can do. And that's what the pros do. I'm still kind of a white hatter where I warn them on occasion, but usually all you get is punched in the face for it. You never get any money, you don't get much glory, but it does give me stories, and it's how I get homework for my students. I find a vulnerability, I tell them, and if they ignore me for 30 days, they become homework. So I'm getting something out of it. But now, if you want to get something, you have to do the ones that actually have bug bounties. But those guys are actually kind of aware, and it's harder. They know enough to not do these really simple things, usually. And there's lots of others. Testing for all these credential problems, like weak lockout mechanisms, so you can try too many times, and so on. Many, many things go wrong. Weak password policy, we let people use short passwords. There's just lots of things that can go wrong. And it goes on and on, all these things that can happen. Exposed session variables and cross-site request forgery, where I can steal a cookie and replay it somewhere else. Various kinds of cross-site scripting, verb tampering. Often, if someone has restrictions of what you can do with get, they forget to also restrict what you can do with post. So even though you have to log in and prove you're administrator before you can use the get method to do something, you can use the post method without logging in on the administrative page and do something. This kind of thing tends to happen. And then there's many, many of these. Error codes often tell you too much. And there's all kinds of weak cryptography, like padding oracles and other things, where even though they are using encryption, it's not really safe. There's a way to trick the encryption into giving you information about the key. Just many, many things can happen. That's why you could really spend a long time trying them all. And this is why so many websites are vulnerable. This is really a lot to expect your developers to do. They're trying to make it work. And you say, you have to understand all this, and they say, you're out of your mind. I've got a job already. You're going to have to hire another team of people that studied all this stuff to patch it. And this is really more than one person's job, to know how to make it pretty and fast and how to make it scale across your 100 machine cluster, and cope with all the client's demands, and then you expect me to do all this too? Yeah, that's why you have a separate QA team and security team that does all this, supposedly. Anyway, so if you choose tools that will let you attack the system, there's a variety of them. You can use developer tools in Chrome and Firefox to see the requests that are going to the server. You can use burp, which we used in projects to catch things on the way out and on the way back to modify them. Z-Attack proxy comes from OWASP, and it can do a vulnerability scan and find some of these problems by trying to send a variety of malformed things to the server and see what comes back. Nikto is specialized just for web applications. It's included in Corley. All you have to do is Nikto -H. It will then test for like 20 or 30 common problems. This one will tell you about PHP MyAdmin, which is a commonly unsafe page that people use to administer servers. And it often has something foolish like a default password on it or something. So it warns you here. Nessus is a thorough vulnerability scanner that actually tries a whole lot of attacks, like a whole lot of the CVE list. It scans like Nmap, finds out what you've got, and then it tries a whole bunch of possible problems with every service it finds to see what's there. It can take hours, but it really can be quite thorough. It has many options. It can do cloud servers, and it can do the latest cool thing like shell shock. Yeah.
Does it scan the code as well or not?
No, it does not do source code scanning. That would be great. All it does is testing the live app. Yeah, source code scanners, those are out there too. And we talk about in the exploit development class. And those are, of course, very powerful also. So Nessus will scan, then it'll give you a report like critical, high, medium, and low, and give you a bar chart of how many there are. So it found a few critical, 18 high, 21 medium findings. And when you go to look at them individually, it'll tell you exactly what they are. This vuln, it'll often have the CVE number, it'll often have a whole page explaining it to you. So it's a big part of any pen test is to run on one of these vuln scanners and check the results. Let me see what this chat is. Nessus totally legal. Yes, if you have the permission of the person you're scanning. If you use Nessus and scan some random person's website, then that's probably not legal. Although it's probably not a significant crime unless you bring it down. But you could, in fact, bring something down with Nessus scanning. It's a lot of traffic, and it could get you in trouble. And when we had we used the Acronetrics Hailstorm scanner here to scan the City College website, and it caused 10,000 error messages and emails in one of our insecure pages and did, in fact, foul things up. So these vuln scanners send a lot of traffic and can lead to a lot of chaos at the other end. And if you set off a lot of alerts and they spend more than like $5,000 or $10,000 running around trying to fix it, then they can charge you for a felony as having wasted that amount of their time. So scanning without permission is risky. Putting out Pasta right at the end of a SQL injection is probably not enough to get you in trouble, but running something like Nessus or a professional scanner for 24 hours to find everything on a server without permission, you will probably get noticed. And in principle, you could probably be prosecuted, although I don't think you'd be in for a big crime unless you actually brought something down or stole some data. But that's a big issue. Anyway.
So is there any way to use Nessus for a couple of hours and use some kind of, it wouldn't be called logic bomb, just to get rid of it, erase it, so you wouldn't be caught?
Not really, because you don't know. And a question I should say for the remote viewers is, could you use Nessus and somehow erase your tracks so you won't get caught? And the thing is, you don't really know what's monitoring you. They could, for example, just be recording full packets, in which case there's no erasing that. So if you assume they're using certain kind of logs, you might be able to erase them, but you never really know. And that's why in the network security monitoring class, we talk about this. If you set up your monitoring correctly, then nobody can erase it. And that's what you should do.
How about if someone used proxy?
Yeah.
Can that, like, it can be detected, but it's going to be shown from somewhere else.
Yes, that you can do. You could run, for example, through Tor. And then, even though they detect the scan, they won't be able to find your location unless you make a mistake of some kind, which is very easy to do. Which is how, I don't know if you were here, Sarah Cortez came last night or the night before. She talked about all these people that use Tor and they still get caught because the cops catch them because they did something wrong. Usually, they don't bother like de-anonymizing Tor, which is difficult. They make some other dumb mistake, like spend the money and get caught or have a physical product shipped to them or something else like that. So W3AF is another vulnerability scanner. I've had very bad results with it. It crashes more than half the time I use it. But here I set up a website in previous generations of this class, and it correctly found a SQL injection I put on the page. So sometimes it works. I find it's not very popular at all compared to Nessus. Nessus is very popular. In quite a few tests, it's the most popular vuln scanner. Even though it's not free, by the way, Nessus now charges money, but there's a limited edition for free, and there's a fork called OpenVast that's completely free. So you can use it to some extent for free.
So OpenVast doesn't give you the amount of information that Nessus.
That is a very good question. Does OpenVast give you the same information? Probably not, because presumably the proprietary version has stuff that the open source people don't know about, but I don't know that for sure. But usually that's what happens. It will only have the information until the time they forked. And after that,
so
yeah.
I use heavily both of those, and OpenVast, the main problem is that it does not have lots of updates. For example, if you have a very weird operating system like AIX or HPUX, so Nessus has a kind of channel with HP and IBM to get those data, the latest patches or something like that. But OpenVast does not, collect those things and recognize those things.
Thank
you.
Yeah.
You have to pay for, and especially for the proprietary, operating system like 40 OS for 48 firewalls. OpenVast doesn't have any information, but Nessus can log in and find the vulnerability and give it to you.
Good, thank you. I appreciate the real experience because I don't have much experience with paid products, but that's what I would expect. They have enough money to pay a bunch of people to keep adding to it, and the open source people don't. Yeah. And the Skipfish is one Google put out, although it never became very popular in the security community, but it's a free scanner and it's really fast, but the main thing it does is spider. It finds every page because that's Google's primary focus, is finding everything. That's why if you put a page on your website and give it a funny name like, grades 2017, and you think nobody will find it, you're wrong. Google will find it, even when you didn't put a link to it anywhere, because they have a really good crawler that finds every file on every web server. You shouldn't be putting anything on a web server if you don't want the whole world to know it. It's a mistake a lot of people make. This is like people put things on Facebook and then they don't want the whole world to know it. And I say, dude, you've got a self-contradictory situation here. Yeah.
So I've asked you this question in the past. What happens if I knew a hacker who taught me some stuff?
Yeah.
And he put some malicious stuff on forums on Google, and I asked you before, you said basically it's impossible.
Right. If somebody puts something up impersonating you, and now it comes up with your name, that's why they now in Europe they just passed.
Family and horrible.
Oh yeah, and revenge porn is a.
And I get tried to get a job, they're going to Google my name.
Yeah. Yeah, and revenge porn is a similar issue, where people have naked pictures of them up and they really don't want them up, and so that's why in Europe they just passed a privacy law that you must have the right to be forgotten. Every company like Facebook and Google and everybody who puts stuff up has to have some way to remove it when they get a request saying, take my stuff off. It's not in America yet, but it's in Europe.
Well, when I wrote to Google and said, look at the form, it says I carry a gun.
Yeah.
And I'm selling ounces of whatever. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I'm really not in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Look where I'm at, look at my location. They took about 4 of the 8 ones off that were completely illegal.
Yeah.
Saying that I carry, I did this and that. But they kept some up saying like a letter from my parents.
Yeah, and there's also the Internet Archive. This is a huge problem. Yeah, but this is a huge problem in America. A lot of people have this problem. And right now in America, there's not much you can do. You can pay services who will try to get them to take it down, but you don't have any right to demand to take it down in America. But in Europe, you do, and that's new. So that may spread to America. A lot of people want this. It seems only reasonable that you ought to be able to demand that anything about you be taken down. But
not true.
The law, I know, but the laws are not there yet. They might be pretty soon though, because all the companies were freaking out because I think at sometime this year, maybe the start of next year, it hits in Europe where every service in Europe is going to have this right to be erased thing. And that is going to change the boat. And so that means Facebook and everybody has to write that software in where there is some way to erase your stuff. And once they have it, it would be pretty easy to just let Americans do it too. So I think we're going to see, if in a couple of years it runs in Europe and it works, we might be able to get that law here. Americans have very little privacy protection compared to Europeans right now. It just has not been a priority over here. But maybe
some company says, "Oh, give me $500 nowadays."
yeah. That's the problem with the.
$500 to give me.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. And why should you? You know, it's the problem with like people are really mad about Equifax. Nobody signed up for Equifax. They did like investigative work to find out your credit history and put it on the server and then let it all get stolen. They're like, dude, I never asked you to have my data in the first place. Now you lose it. Now you want to charge me a fee to protect it. They're like, this is just extortion. And that's the kind of outrage from these things may eventually reach a level where we actually pass a law giving us a right to privacy on the internet. And we'll see. That it's a very big issue.
More things to put that down low.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting issue. They've taken big steps in Europe. Maybe America will catch up with Europe one of these days, and maybe not. It just depends. The other side is where they say you shouldn't have any privacy so we can catch more terrorists. And so those are the two sides. They say no privacy, no erasing, everything has to be available for the cops to stop terrorism. And then there's the people like you that would like to be able to clean our stuff, and they battle. And it has a lot to do with the presidential election and everything else, which side is in ascendance. Right now, it's the no privacy people in ascendance. But, you know, the last election makes it look like maybe it's swinging back the other way. You know, in 4 or 8 years, we might get an administration that's more interested in privacy. Maybe not, though. Because really, both the Democrats and the Republicans are very anxious to be perceived as super tough on terrorism. So they will not like to do something like have a privacy rule that could possibly be interpreted as being soft on crime.
And just a personal opinion, I don't think
Yeah.
last time, but do you think any of the elections in the past 12 to 14 years have been hacked or changed?
That's a very interesting question. We know the Russians hacked us by means of fake social media accounts.
Yeah.
As far as actually manipulating the votes themselves, I haven't seen any proof, but it certainly could happen. People argue about that. I haven't seen any proof that they actually directly affected the votes, but certainly they tried.
Because
30 states had evidence.
Yeah.
That's psychological warfare. That's been going on forever. Propaganda. That's real.
Yeah.
But directly changing the votes is another option, and they almost certainly did it in Estonia. So I mean, it has happened in other nations. There's no proof that it happened here yet, but it certainly could happen if we don't improve our defenses, and that's not happening.
The voting machine, are they hackable?
Yes, the voting machines are hackable. They proved it at DEF CON. The report just came out. They had they had got a bunch of voting machines. They put them at DEF CON. They invited the attendees to hack them, and they were able to successfully hack them completely with just a few hours of study without the manuals or anything. So they proved that they are very vulnerable.
Yeah, it's not for this been hacked. It can be easily said that yes.
We can say that it could be hacked, but we haven't got proof that it really happened. But it is enough to be very concerned.
One DEF CON one, those guys, I watched the video. They unlocked the lock within 10 seconds. They're in, in the box.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like a 5-minute.
Yeah, and we got a voting machine, although we don't have all the parts. We're hoping to practice it here. We get more pieces. And here's another comment here from a student telling me it is the EU General Data Protection Regulation coming in May 2018. With big fines if you don't have the right privacy. So that's it. I knew it was coming pretty soon because I've already seen people freaking out saying your company has to prepare for this. If you do business in Europe, you're going to have to put in these new privacy protections. And maybe someday we'll catch up with Europe, but it's new. But these are great questions. Anyway, let me bring up these last cahoots. Yeah.
If the voting was hacked, would the government admit they were hacked?
That's another issue, and of course, that's already happening. The Trump administration does not want to admit, even that the Russians did propaganda. So I mean, that's another problem. Even if we know they hacked them, which we do, there will be people who will just lie about it. Yeah, there are many layers of issues here. And now I was just reading yesterday, I think, the new CIA director is trying to deny the Russian hacking in order to please Trump. So he appears to be a Trump minion. And so...
But there have been lots of proof that the Trump administration originated that with lots of questions.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. But they haven't been able to prove the collusion with the Russians enough to put him out of office yet. And in the meantime, he remains stubbornly denying it and trying to cover it up. So right now we're in the crazy position of having a leader who prevents us from protecting ourselves from our enemies. In fact, sort of helps them. course, that's happened before too. You know, it's just the crazy world where people who should be on your side aren't all really on your side. It's a big problem. Traitors in your midst. Well, let's try these here. 4 of these. So, what vulnerability lets an attacker see private files on the server? All right. Local file inclusion directly does that. SQL injection does it under certain conditions, but cross-site scripting almost never lets you do that. Local file inclusion is what most directly lets you point to a file and see it. Now, we did do it with SQL injection because we were allowed to have this like load file method, but that's often not permitted. So the most direct answer is local file inclusion. All right. So which vulnerability lets your attacker steal the database? Okay, of course, that's the main thing about SQL injection. You can get the contents of the database. All right, what vulnerability lets one user attack other users? Okay, that's cross-site scripting. Good. All right, and what's the vulnerability scanner that is not free? Spelled it wrong. That's Nessus is not free. All right. So these are the winners. Cam, I know who Cam is. Got RCE, I don't know. They'll have to tell me who they are. And E, I forget who E is. So remind me, I know E's online. Now, I almost remember the name. Is Got RCE here or online? Probably online. So I'll wait a second to see if any of you guys want to send me a message and tell me who you are. Cam, I know. Aha, here comes an identity. Okay, E, thank you. I got E. So I need Got RCE. If you want your points, you'll have to tell me who. Oh, here. Okay, good, good. I see it. Thank you. Good. I found out who that is. Good. And I see you're paying attention. Give me your name in SQL injection form. That's good. Okay, good. Well, then that's it, folks. I'm going to shut it down the online session and go to the lab and help anybody who wants help on projects.